Stop ignoring red flags, or as I call them, red lights in potential clients. Every time I've done this in the 10 years of my business, I have regretted it. I felt bitter about the money I was making. I felt like I had no schedule freedom. And I felt like just honoring the contract made me feel like I was just attached to this client forever. And I know that every writer has worked with red flag clients, but we're going to work on how to avoid them. And you might be like, that sounds nice, but like, what does that actually look like? We're going to go through 5 things. I'm Mandy Ellis. I am a 6-figure freelance writer who helps other freelance writers build high earning businesses they adore. We're going to go through it. So number 1 here, there are specific phrases that you will hear, and I'm going to go through a bunch of them. One is, I just need a writer. So the first thing here is they just think they just need to hire a writer and just like spackle them into place. That's not the case. They think that they can just give you something and then it's like over. They give you no direction or goals or audience information. They're just like, good luck. If you hear, I just need a writer, that's usually a big problem. That's a red flag. The next one is, I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it when I see it is so frustrating because they have no idea what that thing will materialize into. They can't give you specs. They can't give you information about what the piece is or what their audience is or the content that they're looking for that matches their goals. And when you ask them to send an example, and this is something I recommend all the time, when you get a new potential client, you need to ask them to send examples of the types of stuff they're looking for. If they're asking for a blog post, they need to send examples of that. If they're looking for a case study, they need to send examples of that. And if they can't send you any examples, that can be a potential red light. Now, sometimes they're just kind of not sure, and you can send a potential client a sample and say, hey, do you like this format? And they can say yes. But a lot of times when you get the phrase, I'll know it when I see it, combined with the fact that they can't send you any examples of any content they like, that's a huge red flag. And these are the things we're doing to avoid these clients. We're making sure we're avoiding these phrases because that sets us off on the wrong path. The next one is, the work is easy. The work is easy. It should only take you 2 hours. Like, I tried to do it, right? This is something that gets confused where they're like, well, I tried to do it in 3 hours and I couldn't do it, but you're a writer, so like, you should get it done in an hour. No. When they're giving you a time estimate and they're telling you that the work is easy, big, giant red flag, red light there. So when they're trying to combine those 2 things with, I just don't have time, and then that ends up being, I just need a writer, or you should be able to do it quickly. What ends up happening is this giant poop soup of just really a lot of chaos, disorganization, and lack of focus on what the content should be. So if they're telling you the work is easy, they tried to do it in X amount of time, or that you should be able to do it quickly because you're a writer, or they just don't have time and like you should get it done fast, or they're giving you some kind of metric about how much time it should take, that's usually a red flag. All of those things combined. And they may use bits and pieces of those, but for me, whenever I've ignored those things, the work takes way longer than I thought. I'm underpaid by the end of it. They're like asking me to do 10,000 revisions. It's a huge nightmare. So you need to make sure you're paying attention to those things, right? Easy. They tell you how much time it takes. You should be able to do it quickly because you're a writer. They tried to do it in X amount of time, but it should take you less because you're a writer, all that stuff. Next one here is that anything that sounds like you're on a job interview or they're treating you like a full-time employee. And most of the time this comes off as like, oh, well, we're talking to like hundreds of other writers. Like, we don't want to be in a cattle call situation. This is why I teach a lot of people how to send LOIs and pitches, right? LOIs, letters of introduction, go to magazines, pitches go to business, LOIs go to businesses, pitches go to magazines. There we go. But if you're getting on a call and it sounds like a full-time employee, and I've talked to writers who have been freelancers for many, many years, and they still do this where, they're interviewing lots of candidates and they panic. So instead of the writer being like, wait a minute, I don't want to be part of a cattle call, like I want to be one of one, right? That's the thing that you really want to be. They start panicking that they're competing against all these other writers that are in this competition with them. And I always like to think of writers as your comrades, not your competition. So if you go back to the idea that they're comrades, well, the people are going to pick whoever they like. You don't have to compete against everybody else. Like, you should be yourself. You should put up your boundaries. You should treat your business, like it's your actual, like you have boundaries around it and you respect your business. So anytime you're doing that, or they ask you this question about Why should we choose you over the hundreds of other writers that we're talking about? That's just a trap. That's oftentimes a trap, because it's just like, if they're seeing your samples, they've read your copy on your website and your LinkedIn, you guys have vibed on the call, you're asking the right questions, and you're making sure that you're figuring out their goals, who they're talking to, why this piece of content, why now, all that stuff. It should be obvious that you understand how to do your job. Like, why they should pick you is just like a very old school, dated interview question where people who are trying to treat freelancers like full-time people, it just doesn't work out. And this is another thing where I've seen writers induce panic, or they're like, they get into self-doubt or imposter syndrome, where they're like, oh, well, everyone else is more qualified. Oh my gosh, there's so many writers in the market. And it's like, nobody cares about that. Like, there's more writers who are hitting six figures and hitting their income goals and working with dream clients than ever I've ever seen. And I've only been in here for 10 years, right? Well, it's almost 12, but in any case, I think the idea here is that it just feels more public because more people are online. But there were lots of freelance writers decades ago when the internet didn't exist and there wasn't as much panic. So there's this idea that we should feel less than because we have to explain why to choose us. Like, that's just a trap. That's not it. It should be obvious. Like, this is why we like to send LOIs to be one of one. It should be obvious from all of the stuff online, from our samples, from our conversation, the questions that we're asking, how we're working together as a partnership on the initial call or initial emails. That should be a pretty low level leap to say, oh, they're the right person or they're not. So I feel like anything that ends up being like a full-time job, or something like prove to me why it's worth hiring you, or weird phrases like that, that's never going to be a fun time. The next one here is that, oh, well, we worked with other writers and like we fired them all, or they trash talk the other writers, or they trash talk people at the company, or they trash talk a bunch of things about creating content in general, or how you do your work. So anytime you hear something where they're like trash talking other people, that's a big problem. They will trash talk you. There's no way around that. From what my experience is, you trying to prove to them like, oh, I'm going to be different. Like, things are different this time. No, that's really driven from insecurity, from your insecurity of, I'm not good enough. I need to overcome this boundary. Like, I need to prove to the client that I'm going to do a good job. And no, it's just really what it is a huge red light that, like, they don't know what they want. They're not good to work with. They treat their writers or other people at the company poorly. So anytime, if they mention they had a writer for a long time and that person left, that's a different situation than saying they've hired a bunch of writers and those people have, like, they fired them or they quit or something like that. So we don't want to be in a situation where you've heard a lot of trash talking. You're on this initial call with them. They're trash talking writers. They are saying terrible things about the company. They don't understand like why they're creating content or why content is important, any of that stuff. Or they're like stressing a lot about just creating the content. And that will be a big problem, because if they're stressing a lot about creating the content rather than saying, okay, we're going to create this partnership and then we're going to kind of like work together to solve the problem. The stressing part is usually them not understanding how everything works. Last one here. This is one of the last phrases. We don't know our budget. Okay. And this is coupled with something else. It's okay for a green light client to say they don't know their budget because they couldn't go check with someone. Hey, I just need to check with Steve. Steve will know because he's the finance guy, but like, we'll go check the budget. Or they're like, well, we're not sure on budget. For this particular project, we have an overall marketing budget. So they can give you some information, and you can send a proposal and they're like, okay, let me go check, like, we're not sure about our budget, but let's go check about this. But when you hear we don't know our budget and then you send a proposal to them and they say that's too high, that's a giant red light. So they don't know their budget, but then magically when you send a fair proposal, they think that's too high. That's not you. That's them. This is something I have all the time where writers are like, well, they didn't tell me their budget. Like, what do I price? You need to pick the number that makes you a little bit nervous. So when you're pricing your projects, you need to pick a number that makes you a little bit nervous, because that ensures you're not leaving money on the table. That means you're charging confidently. And 99% of writers that I've talked to way undercharge for their work. So you sending a fair proposal, even picking a number that makes you a little bit nervous, my guess is you're still undercharging for what you should for the quality of your work. But if you hear we don't know our budget, you send a proposal and then they say, that's too high. like, that's on them. That's on them. And they're like, oh, well, we thought you would pick this number. It's like, then why didn't you tell me your budget? Why didn't you tell me that so we could kind of figure that out? Good clients will tell you their budget, or they will tell you that they're going to go figure it out before you send a proposal, or they will say, hey, we're not quite sure, but we know we want to work with someone. Can you send a proposal and we'll work it out? Good clients will always negotiate with you. So if you send a proposal and they're like, oh, it turns out, we don't want to, our budget is $5,000, not $6,000, you can decide if you want to negotiate that. They're like, hey, we would love to work with you at $5K. Do you think you can work with that number? Good clients will always negotiate with you because they see the value. Bad clients are like, that's too high. Like, I can't believe you would ever charge that. That's just not a way we want to be. So good clients will negotiate with you no matter the number. They will figure it out. I've had times where I've charged double and they still come back and they're like, can we negotiate down to this? And I'm just like, there is no negotiating. Like, I'm not going to go down by 50%, right? So even clients where they want to work with you, they will negotiate with you. And good clients will understand. They will have a budget, or they will go figure it out, or they'll negotiate some fair or reasonable price with you. So those phrases are really important. So let's recap. I just need a writer. I'll know it when I see it, but they can't send examples of the content that they're looking for. They can't explain their goals. They tell you the work is easy, or they just don't have time, but you should be able to do it quickly. They give you a time constraint. Oh, well, it should only take you 3 hours. I tried to do it and it took me, this amount of time, but because you're a writer, it should be faster. It should be something where the next one is anything that sounds like a full-time job thing, like weird stuff where they're interviewing lots of candidates, or they tell you to prove why they should hire you or why they should choose you over all these other writers. The next one is they're trash talking other writers or the company. And then the next one is they don't know their budget. And that's coupled with you sending a proposal over and they tell you that's too high. So those phrases are really important. Now we're going to talk about number 2. Okay. So we have those phrases. Now we're going to talk about 2 when we're avoiding these red light clients. So they're rude and disrespectful to your boundaries. They ignore your boundaries. They don't ask about what's on your plate, like what's on your current schedule. Do you even have time or space for them? They are not interested in figuring out how to work with you, or what works with you, or how you even work with your clients. They're not even focused on a partnership at all. Like, it's all about them. I need this. You need to do that. We're going to do this. You have X amount of time to get it done. Like, they treat you basically like an order taker. And this is what I think is really important a lot of times when I'm teaching my students to move from order taker to decision maker. And I always give them questions. And a lot of times when they're breaking boundaries and doing this stuff, it happens on your initial call. This is something where you need to suss out these kinds of people on your initial call to avoid signing them, to avoid working with these clients to begin with. And if you're looking for those questions, you can grab them with my free seasoned veteran cheat sheet. I give you a bunch of questions in there to ask on your call to make sure you're sussing out good clients from not great clients or red light clients. So if you go to mandyellis.com/cheat sheet, you can grab it. And those questions will show you, like, do they care about your schedule, your rates? Do they talk about money? Are they interested in like what the process is of working with you? Like, what's our next step? Do we send a proposal? How are we going to do this project? They can give you specs about the project. And then they're also looking for a partner, a long-term partner. They treat you like part of the team versus you just being a dumping ground for work. They're just like, just do this, right? They treat it like a full-time employee where they're like, well, you're just getting paid, so like, do more of this. So anytime you get rudeness or disrespectful stuff on a call, or there's some kind of ignoring of your boundaries, that's really important to pay attention to. Number 3 here is 24 to 72 hour turnarounds. So 24, 48, or 72 hour turnarounds on short deadlines. That very clearly shows they're not planning ahead. They're panicking. They're just like, they can't finish it or whatever, and they're trying to do it fast. Now, caveat here. If you had a long-term client who was like, hey, I really need help, and you have a rush fee that they pay, so your rush fee is usually double what you normally charge or more, then that would be a different scenario. But if you're getting on a call or you're talking to a client and they're like, I need it tomorrow, or like they say things like, I need it yesterday, and they give you basically 3 days to turn it around, like that's not a good thing. You want to avoid that red light. You want to avoid that red light client. They're not planning ahead. They're going to ghost you and then show up when they need something and ghost you and show up when they need something, and you may not get paid and it may just be a huge mess. And from my experience, when you're working with this stuff, like not long-term clients, but people who just show up and need something immediately, that never turns into a great high quality client for the long term. They just show up and ghost you and show up and ghost you, and then it's a huge disaster. Number four, when you get on the call, your personalities don't match. You aren't singing the same song. You're not talking in the same language about the content. And they're also doing something else. So the first thing is that you're kind of talking to them and you guys are just kind of missing each other. You're just not talking about it in the same way. You're not on the same level. Maybe they're playing Pee-wee football and you're playing in the NFL. It's just very clear that you're not speaking about the content in the same way. They don't really see it as a long-term strategy. But I have been on calls, and this is another thing, where someone is doing something else. Like they have a picture behind them, like a frame with glass, and you can see that they're on Slack or they're checking their email or they're doing something else. I've been on calls, multiple calls like that, where it's like I clearly can tell they're doing something else. Like it may look like they're looking at me in the camera. They aren't. They're doing stuff on their computer and they have no idea I can see the screen. So if you're getting on here and it's very clear that it's not a match personality-wise and they're multitasking, that's how your relationship is going to be. Whatever you see on the initial calls or emails, that will continue into the relationship. It's not going to magically change once they sign a contract and give you money. Like they're going to be distracted or disorganized, or they're going to rub you the wrong way, or you're going to be resentful or bitter about continuing to work with someone who's not a good fit for you, and the money won't be worth it. This is a lesson I've learned many, many times. The money is not worth it long term when you're working with these clients, these red light clients, red flag clients you should avoid. The money sounds nice in the beginning, but then you get a couple of weeks into the project and you're like, this is not worth it. This is not worth this money. I could definitely find a better client. So when your personalities don't match, you guys are just have friction. You guys are not on the same page about the content, but also you can tell when they're multitasking. You can tell they're doing other stuff. So they're not even respecting your time by showing up to the call and actually paying attention to what they're doing. And this call is like 15 minutes and they can't spend that time with you. So that's a big problem. And then number 5 here, our last one, number 5, is that there is no specific plan that is not connected to a specific project, that is not connected to specific goals, that is not connected to any kind of audience. They can't explain any of that or who they're making content for. So you will get on these calls with small businesses or smaller companies, and I'm not talking about startups or people with revenue, like actual revenue or funding. You'll get on these client calls because you're looking for small projects because you're scared about getting started and you're playing small, and they will just be like, yeah, we should just create content. And you're like, what? And they're like, I don't know, you figure it out. They have no plan. They have no reason why they're creating content, why their audience would like a blog post versus a guide, why their audience might want thought leadership versus a white paper. They have no idea. They think that, oh, well, like it's just a machine. You just like turn it on and walk away. And that's not how it works. When we have content, when we're working with these good clients, they have content strategies. They are executing plans. Those plans have goals, and those goals are measured by KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. And I don't want you to feel intimidated by that. That's good. We want them to track stuff because then we can get a testimonial with stuff they've tracked and we're like, we're doing a good job. So we want them to have plans and goals because that's really good and we get more specific information. So when you're working with high-end clients, they're executing a plan or a content strategy. They have specific projects, like we need 4 blog posts and a guide every month or whatever that is. And they have a plan to execute that. And they can explain who they're writing to. Oh, we're writing for, small fintech B2B audiences with blah, 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 right? They can give you a bunch of information. They know why they're creating content for them, how to create that content, why that specific type of content. So for me, this is always like the last thing. It's like if I get on a call and it's just like a meet and greet or like some weird thing, like that's not worth it. That's not worth my time. My time is worth getting on a call with someone who's like, I want to move forward. I want to tell you about the project. Are we vibing? Do we have a budget? Are we understanding we're in the same place? And then we're moving forward with that. I want to be on a call with someone who actually understands, like they're motivated to move forward. They understand their audience. They understand why they're creating this content. So when we're looking at these things, yes, sometimes we can get on there and they have like a vague idea of a project. And we can kind of walk them through it. But when you're getting all these things at once, like I've been on calls with small companies where they're just like, we should just create content. They have no goals. They don't understand their audience or what resonates with their audience. They haven't tried anything. They haven't put a plan together. That just turns into a tornado. It's a huge mess. So if someone usually we're working with people who have specific projects, but if you're getting on a call and there's just nothing, they're just like, you should just tell us what to do. That's a big problem. Now, if you were getting on a call as like an advisor, like you were doing a marketing advisory call, or like you were doing an initial content strategy call to talk about what that actually looks like, what creating the plan looks like, that's very different than getting on a content marketing call where they don't even know what's going on. So we would be giving some advisory information if we're on a marketing advisory or consultation, or we're kind of helping with content strategy. But most of the time when we're doing this, we're on calls where people should have their shit together, right? So if you're looking to avoid these red light clients or red flag clients, you need to make sure you pay attention to these things. The phrases that they're using, how they speak to you, things that they're saying that like just rub you the wrong way, personality quirks, anything that's rude or disrespectful, when they don't even know you and they're asking you to turn around work really quickly, you just feel like they're multitasking, they're doing other stuff, they're disorganized, or they're just like we should press a button and get content. All of those things together become a huge mess. There are lots of ways that we can avoid red light clients. These are just some of them. But I feel like what's more important too is that you understand what's a good client for you. I think you should spend some time writing down what a good client looks like for you. What are your green lights? What are the personality things you like? What are the things you like about working with them? Or what are the types of projects you want to work on? Or what's kind of the minimum budget you want to work with? Or the minimum amount you will accept per type of content that you will create? I think that's really important because it makes it very clear. When you focus on what you want, like those green lights, it becomes very clear what the red lights are. And that, I think, is a really strong way to kind of avoid them as well. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I hope it helps you see what we're doing to avoid them, what things we're doing before we ever sign a contract. These are things before we ever move to the next step. Maybe you sent an LOI and you got a response and you're trying to suss things out on the call, or you got an inbound lead and someone came in and you're kind of figuring out like, okay, what are they all about? We can do a lot before we ever sign a contract and then become bitter and resentful and angry, even though we're making money. So I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you next time.